This may shock a few people, but a while back I was cranky. I mean, really cranky. I know this doesn't happen to any of you, but I was cranky. And I was, and you know you're cranky when every little tiny thing bothers you. Everything. We got this new house, and my big debate was whether or not we would have deep peach in the living room or light peach in the. And I was making this was like a life decision, you know. This was life or death, deep peach, light peach, and that's when you know that things are just way off. Here's what I figured out: if you are cranky for a couple of days, it's everyone else's fault. If you're cranky for a week, it's your fault. It was my fault. I had to look at this. So I was even cranky about going to Hawaii. How much of an attitude problem do you have to have about being cranky about going to Hawaii? But I had my excuse. You know what my excuse was? I was going to go to Hawaii, fly 11 hours. I was going to get off the plane. I was going to go over to the hotel, the Hilton, and then I was going to speak the next morning. Then I was going to get right back on the plane. Wasn't even going to see Hawaii. 11 more hours back, away from the love of my life, flame of my eternal being, Steve. So you know I was unhappy. Closest thing to a perfect human being you will ever meet, I swear. Steve. Yes. So off I go, and I'm so cranky that I decide I need an attitude adjustment. You know, I've read all the motivational books. I know I needed to work on my attitude. So I'm sitting on the airplane, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I need divine inspiration. Divine inspiration. So I'm sitting there, and I'm waiting for divine inspiration. And being an impatient person, I was sitting there going, and I would like it in the next 5 minutes before we land, please. And it was not forthcoming. I waited a good 4.5 minutes, and not one thing had happened. So I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And finally, I just gave up, and I said, okay, there is going to be no divine inspiration. Okay. So I get off the plane, and I'm in there, and I'm in my fabulous suit, and I've lost a bunch of weight. I look nothing like that picture. I've lost 50 pounds. I worked so hard. I worked so hard. So yeah, that's the next thing I didn't realize. We'll work on that. Yeah, I think a great photograph and control top pantyhose are the two greatest things in the face of the earth. I know control top pantyhose were definitely created by the Marquis de Sade, but they worked. Notice how, I'm looking so slim. Never mind, okay. All right, so anyway, there I am, and I'm in my fabulous suit, wearing the control top pantyhose, and I'm out in the rain in Hawaii, so it's raining while I'm there. And I'm standing there with my attitude, And I'm waiting for a cab, and this is how we from New York, this is how you wait for a cab when you have an attitude. Right? And this cab drives up, and this guy with a great attitude gets out, and he's got this sparkly little face and these twinkly little eyes, which are just basically ticking me off right about now. You know when you're really down, you don't want anyone cheerful, stop that. So he looks at me and he's all cheerful. And he gets my bag and he puts it in, he says, here, go have a seat and everything. And he's so nice, I start to warm up a little. And he sits down and he has one of those beautiful Vietnamese dialects, just so lovely. And he sits and he looks down and I sit in the back and I'm all drenched, a little feeling all soggy and everything. And he looks back and he says, you okay? And I was like, yes, I'm okay. I'm fine. And he says, you not okay. We in traffic. Let me tell you a story. I said, okay, go for it. And he tells me, in 1975, he had been in and out of the jungle in Vietnam for about 5 years, and he'd been fighting with the Americans. And what happened was the war ended, and he had a wife and two little tiny children, so he went to where his mother lived, where they all lived, and he went home for the first time in months and months and months and months, seeing them. And he walked in the door, and his mother cried, and she made food, and his children were clinging to him, and his wife wrapped herself around him, and she cried, and he cried, and they danced, and they sang, and they sat on the floor, and they ate. And then as the sun started to set, he said there was a knock on the front door. And they had a bad feeling about this, so they hid him. Because he sort of was on the losing side of things. They go to the front door. His mother goes to the front door. They say, where's your son? She says, I don't know. And they barge in, 15 of these big hulking guys barge in with clubs and guns, and they come and they search the whole house, and they drag him out of his hiding place, and his 2 children wrap themselves around his leg, his arms clinging to him, his wife around his neck. They literally drag him out of the house with people, all of his family, hanging from him. And they take him to jail. And jail isn't what it is here in Vietnam in those days. He said, after about a year, almost everyone he had served with is dead. Or they've committed suicide and they're dead. He said after 2 or 3 years, there's just nobody left at all that he meets along the way, and he's still not quite sure why he's still there and still alive. He said 5 years, 7 years, 10 years go by, and finally he said he's sitting and he's praying and he's asking God, why am I still here? And he says he hears a voice in his head, he feels something in his spirit, he can see something in his mind of the faces of his children. And he said he thought to himself, I am here to look into the face of my children every day I possibly can. That's what I came here for. I will live until I can see the faces of my children. 19 years total later. He says he's sitting and he's looking around at everyone. I said, 19 years, didn't you just hate these people by that point? And he said, yes, 19 years, I hate them. 19 years, one day, no hate them. The obvious question was, what happened on the one day? And he said, I look at them, I think, we all the same. They want to get up in the morning, look at their children's eyes too. I can't hate them. 6 months later, he's released from prison. No reason, just released. His wife, they all thought he was dead, of course. His wife has remarried. She's in Hawaii with the children, who are now fully grown. He works, he slaves, he does everything he can, he borrows to be able to get to Hawaii. He says, he calls up his former wife. She says, I'm so sorry. She cries. He says, I understand. It hurts, but I understand, you know. And she says, you have to come and see the children. And he says, I'm afraid. I'm afraid. What if they don't recognize me? I'm afraid. She says, come see the children. Come see the children. And he says it takes him all day standing across the street from where they live to get up the courage to go over and knock on the door. And he said he walked in the door, and the little one, you know, had been really small, was grown. And the bigger one, he thought maybe would recognize him. The boy walked over and looked him in the eye, you know, eye to eye, recognized him like that, and threw his arms around him. And the little girl, who was still quite small, you know, in size, came over and looked at him and had an instant moment of recognition and wrapped her arms around him. And he said it was all worth it. And that one moment. One moment. You really have to be careful what you ask for. When you ask for divine inspiration, it shows up in the form you just never expected. I looked at him and I said, is all of that true? He says, yes, of course. I am now at that point feeling incredibly shallow. Really shallow. Deep peach, light peach, these are my big issues. My big life issues, or whether or not, you know, the dog needs to have a groomer or not a groomer. What's wrong with me? He had a purpose. He knew what it was. And he took time to be able to be with his children every single day. From that day on, he said he sees them every single solitary day. He looks into the eyes of his children. So I'm sitting there stunned in the back seat. And he looks back and he goes, your turn.